12 months, 6% per annum for 24 months, or 9% per annum for 36 months. Remember our exclusive 4-star warranty with our 8-day... Please enter our draw for a free 84 gas-powered Mini Corvette. See us now at Town Centre Chevrolet Oldsmobile next to the Guildford Shopping Centre in sunny Surrey.
BCTV, we're giving it all we got.
Good morning. It was not before time. The axe has finally dropped on the back of the neck of poor Roger Nielsen. Harry Neal announced in Edmonton this morning that that man there is out. There should be little surprise. His record as coach for the Vancouver Canucks since he came here at the end of 1981 was a pitiful 53 wins, 61 losses, and 23 ties. He has, however, my great and sincere personal sympathy because we on the West Coast managed to destroy in this lotus land any team that's headed for triumph. Maybe it's the climate, maybe it's the people, who knows? Harry Neal, I don't think, has said yet who's going to replace Roger Nielsen. That's that. Down to business this morning. Bad fire in Surrey, which you must know about. Steve Wyatt reports.
5 fire halls responded to this one just after 1:30 this morning. A tanker truck is in flames at the side of 152nd Street in South Surrey. Down the road, what is left of the car that is reported to run a stop sign. The driver's body is discovered halfway between the two wrecks. The driver of the truck escaped shaken but not seriously hurt. He had been hauling 8,000 gallons of gasoline, which quickly ignited in the surrounding area. One house is evacuated, and hydro was cut for a short time. Water and foam had to be trucked in as firemen fought the explosion for 4 hours.
Well, we're putting foam in the ditch there. The river is just a few hundred feet down here. We're trying to keep the diesel out of the ditch and yet not let it get away. As you can see, the grass in the field is all burnt. It has been real hot here. If you were here a few minutes ago, they were burning higher than the telephone pole. We've got it calmed down now.
The driver of the car is identified as 37-year-old Michael Asher of Hope. He was declared dead on arrival at Royal Columbian Hospital.
Thanks, Steve. You'll remember yesterday we had Dr. George Peterson of UBC on, giving us the happy tidings that he's going to slash staff by between 350 and 450 people by April the 1st. That he's $18 million shortfall for UBC alone, and that student fees are going to go up 33%. Well, as Pat McGee once said, university education in British Columbia is a bargain, whatever the price. And McGee should know he's a tenured professor as well as a cabinet minister in the social credit government. So to get the reactions of the poor, beleaguered, poverty-stricken students, we have Kevin Russell from SFU, Brian Stevensen from UVic, and Lisa Hebert from UBC. And then it's a special package of surprise this morning. That mild-mannered, modest, unopinionated woman from the East. Her name is Barbara Amiel. I'll ask her the question on the air. Editor of the Toronto Sun, columnist in the Toronto Sun, television performer, thinker par excellence, and known somewhat to lean slightly to the right. But first, after the program, we're going to talk about Satiacum, Robert Satiacum. Is he a refugee or is he a racketeer? He's the guy who's in the bucket at Ocala trying to prevent himself from being deported to the United States, where he waits sentence on 46 convictions for lotteries, gambling, extortion, arson, attempted murder, et al. Satiacum, Chief Satiacum. I hope you're watching in the Ocala this morning, Chief, after the break. There's a man called Robert Satiacum, chief of the Puyallup Nation, and we all know where that is, down the road in Washington State, who's sitting in Ocala prison waiting to find out if he's going to be deported across the 49th parallel. Now, it's a perfectly simple issue, I think, as of this moment. Is he a fugitive, a convicted racketeer with God knows how many charges against him, including attempted murder? Or is he a refugee who can stay up here and avoid the consequences of what appear to have been the acts decided in the states and the courts in Washington State? And to fill us in and give us the case and the cause, if there is a cause, is Donna Berg from Seattle, one of his co-defense counsel. Where's Hohlbein, his defense counsel? They're the two American lawyers. And here we've got Gerald Goldstein, Vancouver barrister and solicitor, who's acting for Satiacum in the deportation hearings. Don't tell me he's really a fugitive. He was convicted in the Washington state courts.
Yeah.
Had he been sentenced?
He certainly is a fugitive. No, he hadn't been sentenced.
Don't tell me he's a refugee.
He's a refugee.
And that's your case?
That's part of our case.
How many things was he convicted of? Because I remember we ran television coverage of the duty-free cigarettes and the lotteries and the gambling down there. Tell me, what does your crown say he's guilty of?
Well, they say he's guilty of attempted murder, bribery, attempted arson, also cigarette counts, embezzlement, you name it. They threw the book at him.
Well, of course, in the great system of American freedom and justice, he was properly convicted in your courts.
Well, that's an assumption you make, sir.
It's not an assumption you make.
No, I'm not willing to buy into that.
Has he been sentenced yet?
No, sir, he has not.
What does he face in the way of sentences?
The sentencing under the racketeering and also under the health fund cases.
Now, who's going to make the case that he's a proper refugee in Canada with his Indian status?
Well, he's in a very interesting area, Mr. Webster. It's not only the matter of his claim to being a refugee, it's interesting, for example, that Mr. Ellsberg in the United States could have been granted refugee status in Canada if that refugee part of the Immigration Act had been had been proclaimed at the time. His claim basically is as a refugee. He's also made a claim to being an Indian under the Canadian Indian Act. That is presently being pursued also, because if he is an Indian under the Canadian Indian Act, he can't be deported to the United States. Ipso facto, he's an Indian, and a Canadian Indian.
Now, but tell me something about Satiacum.
Well, he's a 54-year-old Indian. He's of Duwamish extract. His great-great-grandfather was Chief Seattle, who is certainly known to a lot of people. He's an Indian activist. He's been involved in Indian causes since he was a little boy, when his grandmother set him out to do a job for the Indians. He believes in the things he's done. He's responsible for the, in the main, I think, for the Bolt decision, which gave the Indians in the state of Washington 1/2 of the catch of salmon. He's been involved in a number of things.
Just a minute, the Bolt case, that comes back like a bolt from the blue.
Right.
The Bolt case was where they fought the non-Indian fishermen and got a decision, presumably from a Judge Bolt.
That's correct.
That the Indians in Washington state are entitled to 1/2 of the total salmon catch in Washington state waters.
Yeah, that's by virtue of treaty rights under the 1854 Medicine Creek Treaty.
And is that in effect now?
Yes, it is. Of course it is.
I'm not saying of course it is, but I mean just that we've got the same issue up here now, where the federal government's talking about redoing the balance of Indian catches in the favor of Indians, and there's a lot of trouble about it. How come, though, Donna? How come on a reservation, if that's what it was? This is called the Puyallup Nation. How much land do they have?
Well, not very much now. Originally, a large part of Tacoma, a great deal of land that gradually was taken away. I think all they actually own now is their cemetery.
Was it taken away legally or improperly by the white man?
Probably depends on who you're asking the question to. Most of the Indians think it was unfair.
And was that where all these duty-free cigarette shops and gambling was taking place?
Yes, yes.
What are the circumstances alleged Satiacum? Because after all, when he attempted murder, whom does the crown, the state, say he attempted to murder?
Well, they say he attempted to murder Ramona Bennett, who is an Indian activist. When she's asked about it, she says she doesn't think so. That's not the kind of thing that Bob would do. He's a gentle person. So that's the individual that they say that he attempted to murder.
Did she not give testimony in court?
She gave testimony that someone fired at her car.
And there was other testimony that he was the guy, presumably, who
Well,
fired.
there was testimony by an individual who we feel was a part of the Tacoma mob. Perhaps you've heard of the racketeering down here in Pierce County.
No, I'd like to hear about it.
Well, there's a large number of people who have been involved in acts of bribery, extortion, arson in Pierce County. This is Tacoma. It's right in the neighborhood, in an area of the reservation. What happened was that the sheriff was involved in this, and this went into a series of federal trials. One of those individuals, a fellow named Joseph Laviola, inveigled his way into Bob Satiacum's enterprises, the businesses that he was conducting, and was, unbeknownst to Robert Satiacum, was involved in some kind of a drug deal for the mob on the East Coast. He was picked up, brought back, and squeezed by the federals to make a case against Robert Satiacum. We feel that his testimony was perjured in the case, and he says that third and fourth hand that someone else had said that Bob said that he wanted Ramona Bennett put out of existence, and of course that's what this is all about.
In other words, as defense counsel, you can tell me, I suppose, that it's in certain aspects of the case, it's pretty thin.
That's absolutely so, yes.
But you have not had an opportunity yet to appeal his conviction.
That wouldn't be until after sentencing.
When was he sentenced?
He was not sentenced. He was
When was he convicted?
He was convicted in the fall of '82, and he left in November. The sentencing date was in November. He left Seattle for Canada in November of '82.
But I saw you on a same television clip as he was, saying, if I'm found guilty, I'm not a coward, I'll do my time.
Yeah, that's true. That's what he said at the time. Bob was under a lot of pressure. You got to understand that the government had confiscated all of his property, filed liens against everything. Bob had a large family. He was slowly falling to pieces. His health was poor. He had a clot in his leg. He had all kinds of problems going on. He left for BC, no knowledge on my part that he was leaving. And he saw a medicine man up here and spent quite some time, 2 to 3 weeks, with a medicine man up in BC, and got well, and then started moving among the tribes up here.
Mr. Hal, you'd give me the name of the medicine man.
Well, I'll ask Bob and see if I can give you a prescription for whatever he got.
What's the total sentence to which he's liable?
Oh, it goes well over several lifetimes. I think it's about 300 years.
300 and some years.
300 and some years he could be.
More with the Satiacum case, which is the fugitive or refugee, convicted racketeer, I suppose it's an accurate description as of this moment.
That's one way to put it, yes.
Wrongly, you would say?
Well, yes.
After the break. This guy Satiacum, regardless of the rights and wrongs of the case, is obviously a fascinating character. I've just learned from my guests here, but first of all, I'll come to that later. Gerald Green, Goldstein. These little blanks I
know,
have
it's tough when you get
as
older,
one
isn't it?
gets older.
Yes.
The proceedings that are coming up shortly, when?
February the 1st.
Are precisely for deportation.
That's correct. Actually, what is happening is what's called a statement under oath. He's making a claim to being a refugee under the United Nations Convention as recognized by Canada. He's already faced one immigration hearing in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Oh, he headed up to North Battleford, didn't he?
That's right, and he was captured in North Battleford.
After some kind of chase?
After some kind of chase. And had an immigration hearing in Saskatoon, which Mr. Hohlbein and myself were at. Submissions were made to have Mr. Satiacum transferred to British Columbia. Obviously, those submissions have met with success, and he's now here.
Well, that's fair, because it lets Mr. Hohlbein come up and see him a lot more easily than going to North Battleford, Saskatchewan.
We're glad to have him over here.
One of the few times, incidentally, that the immigration people have actually done something like this. Usually, they don't like to transfer prisoners.
Well, they know this is a delicate one and a sensitive one.
That's
Is there
right.
not a basic right for coast Indians, or even interior Indians in Canada, freely to cross the borders, both borders, without work permits?
That's the understanding
Yes,
under the
the
Jay
Jays.
Treaty.
That was the Jay Treaty.
Yes, sir.
He was the Secretary of State in 1890 or something.
Yeah, he's a North American Indian. I think he'd be subject to that Jay Treaty.
But if you can travel freely across the border both ways, can you be taken freely across the border both ways?
Well, I don't think so. You mean legally or illegally?
I'm talking about being shipped back to do 300 years.
Well, that would be an illegal act, in my opinion.
But you get the logic of what I'm saying.
Yes.
If Indians are free to travel the border, they're free to be taken across the border under some law or other. Now, this man Satiacum, you tell me he a personal friend of Jimmy Carter?
He was, Bob was really an international figure. He represented a lot of Indian tribes in their efforts for self-determination, commercial self-determination. Spent a lot of time teaching Indians that they could do something besides paint pots alongside the road. They had to gather an economic base. We're talking about acquisition of land, the acquisition of assets upon which they could build, rebuild their self-respect, which we think was taken from them.
Well, who pioneered the tax-free smoke shops? Was it him?
I'm not sure who started the first ones. It was some friends and relatives that he had that first got him interested in it. But it's been going on in several reservations across all of the United States.
Yeah, did they make a lot of money for the Indian bands?
Eventually, yes, and that was what caused the trouble, of course, with the government.
Apart from this, you say, phony involvement with the people in Tacoma. What do you, Pierce County you call it?
Pierce County.
I don't know. What do you think of your chances of success in keeping... You want him to become a Canadian Indian now and stay in this country? Or do you want him back to face his sentencing and his appeals?
Well, I hope a federal judge isn't listening to me at this point in time, but I'm exercising now, I think, his right under the United Nations Charter and under Canadian law. He is subject to Canadian authority at this time. I'd like to see him stay here because I think he can get a fair shake in Canada. I have great respect for the Canadian legal system and also for your RCMP. I think they've treated us very fairly up here.
Well, I'm glad, I'm happy you're so happy about this, but a lot of people up here, Mr. Goldstein, will say, who needs the cost of him? Is he going to be a burden to the taxpayer in Canada if he comes up here? He's broke now, I presume, or near it.
Near it, that's right.
Is he going to be a burden to the Canadian taxpayer? Or would you rather not answer this
I'd rather not
question
answer that.
on this particular occasion?
Right.
Quite fascinating, though. You say he was the nephew, the great-grandson of...
Great-great-great-grandson of Chief Seattle.
Chief Seattle. Wife and kids?
He has seven children. And presently has a wife, Suzanne Satiacum. You may have seen her in some of the clips in the
Yes, I
past.
have.
Very attractive, lovely woman.
But you wouldn't argue that there are a number of these lesser offenses in which he probably has been justly convicted.
Well, I think no, I would argue that point. I think it's the Indians' right to trade under the 1854 Medicine Creek Treaty. So if we're talking about cigarette sales, he has a sovereign right to sell cigarettes as a member of a Indian nation. It's the United States that's abrogating those treaties. And
Tell me, do
that's
the people of Washington State get annoyed at these tax-free smoke shops and liquor outlets which don't pay state or federal taxes?
Not enough to keep away from them.
So it's now an accepted part of Washington State life.
Well, I think it depends on whose ox is gored. I think if you're talking about the person that buys cigarettes, he's happy to have them. If you're a Safeway store or someone who has an economic interest in the drain-off to the Indians, you've got a different view.
At one time, did he have a very good image in Washington State, Satiacum? Because obviously it'd be a bit shattered now.
Probably was a bit shattered when he was back fishing and thrown in jail for
On the boat case?
On the boat case, but when the boat case was finished, of course, he was on top of the heap. He had won what no man could do. He spent hours fishing, hours in jail, time and time and time again, thrown in jail. No one helped him, and he fought that single-handedly.
And you would recommend, as a man of considerable probity, despite all this, would be an asset to this country?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. This is a political persecution. That's all it is.
Gerald?
Well, there you have it from Mr. Hohlbein. He's in a very interesting area. Those areas will be adjudicated upon, and I suppose in time we'll get the decision.
Hearing date's February 1.
Yes.
My thanks very much indeed to Donna Berg. You Americans are really quite nice. Wes Hohlbein.
Thank you.
And Gerald
Goldstein.
Goldstein! After the break. Budget cuts and restraints are hitting home for the universities. 50,000 university students don't quite know what's going to happen to their finances this year, but we heard George Peterson say yesterday that fees at UBC are going to go up 33%. UVic will probably go up 25%. SFU haven't said much, they'll probably go up the same. I have here this morning 3 representatives of these 50,000 students. Lisa Hebert, Alma Mater Society, UBC. Brian Stevensen, President of the Alma Mater Society of UVic, and Kevin Russell, External Relations Officer, fancy title, Simon Fraser University. Lisa, I'll start with you. Is this not a reasonable and proper thing for the government to do in times of restraint? Because as McGeer said, whatever the price, university tuition is a bargain.
I don't know, it's a really serious situation. You said at UBC tuition is going up 33%, but in the next couple of years it's proposed to more than double. It's going to, in 3 years, it's going to go up 126%, which is going to be very serious. Because what's going to happen is there will be many students who won't be able to afford to go.
We'll get into some of the details. Let's take your position, Kevin.
Our main position is that in Canada, of all the countries in the OECD, the industrialized nation, Canada has the fewest people going to post-secondary education.
You're joking.
Of all the regions in Canada, BC has the fewest going to post-secondary education. In that situation, they're putting up massive financial roadblocks to the people of BC.
Brian, your view.
Well, to expand on what Kevin is saying, in Canada, students get 21% of the students in BC, 21% of the national average that we have in BC are the students that I'm sorry, you can just go on.
No, don't worry about that, but don't get involved in national percentages. What I'm concerned about is the fact that they've tightened up all of the regulations on grants and aids, and apparently they're taking the money from the feds and hiding it so that they have to give less, they being social credit. Who can explain that to me?
There's something called EPF, which is Established Program Funding. The federal government says they're giving money to, for instance, hospitals and post-secondary education.
Oh, but back to that again.
Yes, and the provincial government says, no, it's general revenue. So they gave us $33 million extra last year, and the provincial government pocketed it and then lowered the amount of money that they spent to us. When they first set up funding for post-secondary education, it was about 50-50 for the two governments and contributions. Right now, it's about 3-to-1 for the federal to the provincial in contributions.
The real problem that we're having is that the federal government is investing more and more money in the education in BC, and the provincial government is investing less and less over the years.
How does that show, though, in the students who will or won't qualify for aid this year? Because I remember vaguely that it was going to be the same amount from the provincial government for student grants, right? Grants?
Well, they say it's the same amount. They say that single students can still qualify for $2,000, but the criteria has been very seriously changed so that in actual spending allocations, the provincial government is going to be spending about $9.7 million less provincially in student aid, which is a 40% reduction. And to do that, they have increased the federal portion, which is in loans.
Right.
So students are being able to qualify for incredible debts right now.
In other words, they may qualify for a bigger debt, a bigger loan, but fewer students will get it.
Not only that, but we've also heard that they're considering getting rid of the grant program entirely. And since the average allocation is about $3,600, and if that was all loan, and then you add in a tuition increase of what may be $1,000 or even $2,000 a year, that means you're going to be borrowing $25,000 to go to post-secondary education. You're mortgaging your life for what used to be a right.
Who wants to get in debt $35,000 for a 4 or 5 year program to go to university when you come out you don't find a job?
Well, just a minute. You got to justify that statement to me. First time it's been thrown at me that it costs you $25,000 to $35,000 for a university education.
This year at UBC, the average student loan, the average assessment that was given out in loans and grants was $3,600.
Right.
At UBC, and that includes dependent, independent, those from the interior, those from the Lower Mainland. The average given out at UBC was $36. Now, tuition is going to go up another $1,000 for sure in the next 2 or 3 years. So then we can honestly say that students' costs, the average cost will be $4,600. If you're going into commerce or engineering, that's a 5-year program. Multiply 4,600 times 5 is $23,000.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, what I noticed that
and that's the average.
UBC announced yesterday they're going to limit enrollment to 3,250 new admissions each year. Is that bad?
Well, we've just heard on the news that David Thompson University is closing. That's 500 students, and UBC is going to be cutting 500 students. And then you look at that in terms of 4 years, we're losing a DTUC every year. David Thompson University is closing every year at UBC.
But with this financial juggling, how much tougher is it going to be for students in the universities now, or even going in to qualify for aid? Have they tightened the regulations on status, independence, and qualifications?
Last summer, Jack, the provincial government made the greatest changes, adverse changes, to the student aid program since its inception. Not only did they cut it by 40% from the year previous, but they cut eligibility down to the bone, so that now a lot of people who do need are not deemed to need the money.
Spell that out for me. For instance, how much of a load do I have to carry in university to qualify for student aid?
That's one of the changes. It used to be that if you took 60% of a full course load, you could apply for student aid, the federal loan and the provincial grant. And that was very good for people like single parents, people that needed to work so that they wouldn't have to take such a debt load, or to deal with the fact that they needed more money. When you up it to 80%, that means that people with dependents, that means single parents, that means people that don't have very much money, that couldn't find work during the summer, are not going to be able to find part-time work.
Well, and who can find part-time work anyway in this economy?
Find part-time work anyway?
But that's really, let me clear that up. Single parents will not qualify nearly so easily as they did before.
That's right.
Have they made any other changes in what is... Supposing I drive the old man's car, or I stay at home for a few weeks, does that disqualify me for student aid?
They put in some new rules. If you have driven your parents' car, then your parents' income has to be assessed, and they are forced to contribute a certain amount of money, whether or not they do or not. You hope that they will contribute money, because they will be assessed to do that. If you've lived at home for 6 weeks, any time during the year, they have to contribute. If they've been generous enough to give you $600 or more, they'll have to contribute more.
Let me give you an example.
Yeah,
Let me give you an example. For instance, if you're 28 years old and then the semester is ended and you have to go out and find part-time work during the summer, or full-time work if you're bloody well lucky enough, you can't find it for a month and you're about to lose your apartment. You give up the last amount of your money to make sure that you keep the apartment because it's near where you're going to be going to school, and you go and live with your parents for 6 weeks. That's it. You can't get student aid anymore if your parents have any money at all, even though you're 28 years old.
Yeah. Mind you, if the parents have money, is it fair that they should be leaned on to pay the...
Well, if the parents have money, then their incomes will be assessed, and of course they'll have to contribute.
That's a normal ratio at the moment. If you have money,
Right.
you're assessed and you pay.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that everybody who leaves home necessarily gets student aid if they tell
Oh
the
no,
truth.
they're quite strict regulations. To be independent, you'd have to be away from high school for 4 years, or in the workforce for 2.
Because I know a lot of kids
so.
who get student aid, whose parents have got millions, for God's sake.
The problem is now it's no longer student aid. It's 2 points above prime. You're borrowing $25,000 at 13 and 14%. I mean, how much money are you going to be paying back?
I didn't. 13 or 14%. But how many pay back?
Most of them do. They have a very good repayment ratio.
They've got the highest repayments ratio or something like that for any type of loan
of
in
any
Canada.
sector of loans.
Listen, to top it all off, Jack, last year the provincial government was 3 months delayed with their criteria, and that made students not receive their money till October or November when they needed it September the 1st. They themselves are not letting the program out on time.
They've been doing that for years. They always run 3 months late on their accounts
But they're
payable.
playing with people's lives, Jack.
More with the students after the break, and phone calls. Well, let's get a bit personal here with Lisa Hebert, Brian Stevensen, and Kevin Russell. Along which year are you in at university?
I'm graduating this year, thank goodness.
So you've done how many years?
4 years.
How much do you owe in student loans?
I've been, well, I guess one of the reasons I go to UBC is I could afford to go, so I'm not.
You're clean.
eligible
How
for
about you,
student aid.
Brian?
I'm in my 5th year, finishing this spring, and
In what?
In political science.
Right.
And I'll be in debt around $8,000.
How about you, Kevin?
Under 4.
Under
Third year.
Third year. Taking what?
Political science, economics,
Oh,
double
my
major.
God almighty. Political science. What the devil are you going to do with political science? There are no politics in this province. There's only verbal terrorism, as you well know. Now,
It's more than verbal, unfortunately.
what about, how much will your fees at UBC go up this year, just in the fees alone?
Well, probably another $300 at least. It's about 30%, and right now fees range from about $1,000 to $1,500.
Depending on what you're in. By the way, I didn't ask you what you're doing there.
Oh, I'm taking film and TV.
Film and TV. Competition.
She might take your job soon.
Yeah, cut that camera off right away. What about residencies? Are the costs is it cheaper now still to live in a residence than to hire your own board and lodgings?
It depends. At UBC, it's about $25,000, and I know if you're on student aid, it costs more to live in residence than you're allowed to spend, or what you're allowed to get with student assistance.
People I feel sorry for are the students from the interiors. I'm not that crying so many tears about DTUC, but...
Well, one of the important things at UVic is that approximately 45% of the students come from the interior. Now, student aid does not account for travel costs and relocation every year. And the reduction in student aid is just going to mean that those students from the interior won't be able to come to the Lower Mainland or to Victoria for an education. With the elimination of DTUC, that means that rural students in the interior won't have a chance.
As an amateur political scientist, that's your best weapon against social credit. Because the old man WAC spent years equalizing conditions for the interior and putting his foot on the Lower Mainland.
Sure. This is why we can't understand why these policies, if it is true that the social credit government has its power base in the interior, why are they hurting the people in the interior most?
Write your thesis on that.
I shall.
Now, what else have we got? What have you not screamed at me about? You haven't attacked the government politically. Do you want to make a political attack on them?
Go ahead,
political attack on the government?
Yeah.
They don't seem to have any vision, Jack. They don't know what they're doing. Somebody says, what are we going to do about education? And they say, well, we'll cut. And they go, yeah, then what? Well, we'll cut. Well, then what do we do? Well, we'll cut. Then what do we do? Well, I guess we'll cut again. So essentially, because we have the lowest participation rate in Canada, because Canada has the lowest participation rate of all the countries in the world, we have a population that has not been given the opportunity to advance. As you said on yesterday's show, most of the people coming in for our professional jobs are coming from outside BC. I don't know what the people of BC are doing, not giving themselves the chance to advance.
I'd like to say something to the taxpayers of this country. There's a contradiction in the policies of this government. On the one hand, the Ministry of Universities wants to have high tech and industry, and on the other side, they don't allow the education system to go forth. If this province is going to be competitive in this country and in the world market, we need universities.
Yeah, but what we need for high tech are a bunch of clones. Skilled clones, non-union, to work like they do in Japan.
You need research and development.
No, you need research and development.
People to design technology.
That'll be the day. Here's a call from Nelson. Don't talk. Are you going to talk about DTUC?
Yes, I am.
Are you one of the students who's out of luck?
No, I'm
At
one of the
DTUC?
students that was planning to go next year, and still plans to, actually. What I wanted to ask, Jack, is I actually wanted to ask the students if they were in support of the College Board's decision to fight to save DTUC.
Well, I have an answer to that. Last night we had a Students' Council meeting at UBC, and Students' Council unanimously is sending a telegram to the provincial government to ask it to rescind its decision to close David Thompson University.
You would do that anyway.
And are you in contact with the student body group of DTUC in coordinating any plans?
Well, we're in contact with the Canadian Federation of Students, and we all participate as members.
For those who don't know what DTUC is, it was the campus of David Thompson University College, I think they call it. David Thompson University Centre, which was arbitrarily closed a couple of weeks ago because it had 500 students and 100 staff and grew out of the old Notre Dame private university and is now officially closed. It was
as of May 1st.
As of May the 1st.
In a very arbitrary fashion, I might add.
Yeah, thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Yeah.
Nice to talk to you on the phone.
Skip the niceties. If you've got a question, ask it.
I have not a question. I have had 4 students at UBC, and I started in 1950 with the first one until 1960, the last one.
What's your problem?
And the fees were $400 to $500 fees. We paid our fees, and my kids all graduated, and I think the students are just everybody wants to take advantage of the taxpayer.
That's
and
right.
I'm against that.
He has no sympathy for you, and many people of that generation do not have sympathy for you. You're the kids of the affluent generation. Medicare, food in your stomach, no bare feet. Gee, you've had it soft.
Well, but if he paid $400 or $500 fees, perhaps he doesn't understand that medicine students are going to have to pay fees of $3,000 a year. That's an incredible amount of money when you have to add in living costs and multiply that by the length of the program.
That's only a total of 130 students, don't forget. You've got 20-odd thousand at UBC. You only graduate, you're only 130 maximum. It's going to be
2,000 for arts?
2,000 for arts.
A year?
What good is a BA to you nowadays?
Remember,
It's very good. Obviously, all the figures show that if you have a degree, you have a better chance of getting a higher level of employment.
It's got good snob value.
Well, it's more than that, because all our professionals are basically coming from out of province, and the people of British Columbia deserve that opportunity.
Okie dokie. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. You taking calls, are you, for the Webster show?
Well, I think so. Yeah, go ahead. Would you please speak up? Did you tell this guy he's on?
Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, say something.
Got the TV? On here.
Oh, you stupid. Turn down the volume.
Go away.
You know, my mother told me many years ago, when you grow up, Jackie, she said, you have the choice between being a television commentator and playing the piano in a bordello. Play the piano in a bordello. One more segment of calls with students after the break.
no, but this is another issue.
3 students, UBC, UVic, SFU. I think they're in orbit over the cutbacks and the increases and restrictions and all the rest of it. But let's try and get some calls on this thing that makes sense. Go ahead, please.
Why do they feel that my tax money should pay for their way to college?
Well,
They want to get out and work. They say they can't get a job. And if they got any gumption at all, they can get a job. I see a lot of people out there without a college education getting jobs. I'll take the answer off the air.
Okay.
Good.
Let me destroy first one myth. We're all taxpayers in this province, and we're going to be paying a lot of taxes for the rest of our life to pay for the policies of this provincial government. We want a good education system for this province, and we're willing to pay for it.
Is that moved and unanimously carried?
Most of the things that we're trying to prevent are going to happen after we go. We're not here for ourselves. We're here for the people of British Columbia and to provide an opportunity for the people of British
Go
Columbia.
ahead, please.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, I'm a student at UBC, and I have 2 small children. I'm a single parent,
Yes?
and I don't understand why the government would prefer to double my tuition fees so that I can't go to school any longer.
How old are you, by the way?
I get $5,600 each year to live on with my 2 children.
Will you still qualify this year?
Yes, I do.
What year are you in at university?
Year 2.
What are you taking?
Arts.
What are you taking?
In arts,
And what are you going to do if you get a degree?
I'll go into education.
You're going to go into education. Not the best time in the world to aim at education, is it?
Unfortunately
In this
not.
particular province. But they're not going to double your fees.
They're going to double them in 3 years, more than double them in 3 years.
In 3 years' time, at 30% of the time, you say. But at the moment, it only covers 20% of the cost of the university bills.
No, it covers
tuition
11%.
11%?
Of the overall budget, which includes everything.
Best of luck, love. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you, ma'am.
Okay, first of all, I don't understand why the gentleman said he felt that he had a right to post-secondary education. But my point is, why don't the student union bodies take a good long look at what we're charging out of province and out of country students? They should take a page out of the American book, which charges out of province and out of country students 3 and 4 times what the in-province students are paying. That would then alleviate part of the problem.
Okay, ma'am.
Well, if the woman will be pleased, she'll note that UBC probably today is going to initiate differential fees for foreign students of 2.5 times that of domestic fees. But
I think that's perfectly proper.
I'd like to add that that isn't going to save us very much money, because at UBC we've only got 257 international students, undergraduates.
How many visa students do you have?
Those are visa students.
How many visa students do you have at SFU?
I'm not sure.
A very high
about
percentage.
7%. 8%.
No, it's a higher percentage
Oh,
than
it's
that.
about 8%.
Less than 5%.
We have a quota of 7% at the
Quite
moment.
We have
obviously.
3%, and the ones that they're going to charge differential fees to are less than 1%. Those are the undergraduates. And if, just a second, if they double UBC fees and then charge international students 2.5 times greater than that, they're only going to make $1 million, which the economic argument just doesn't wash.
There is another argument, in case you hadn't thought of it. And that simply is that if it discourages 150 overseas visa students, it makes 150 places for Canadians.
Well,
but what you're talking about is they're closing a DTUC a year at UBC, 500 seats. Even if you got rid of all 250,
Agreed.
that wouldn't slow down the process. It would only bring in...
That's it, but DTUC's not your best argument.
There's a point about out-of-province students. The lady should remember that we're a Canadian confederation and that we should treat all of our Canadian citizens the same across the country.
Agreed on Canadians. No, I'm agreed on Canadians, ma'am, but I would put the visa students up 5 times, not 2.5 times. Go ahead, please.
It is 5 times.
It isn't, it's 2.5 times.
But where everybody else is getting doubled.
Well, over 3 years. You're playing with figures again, a typical political trick.
We're learning, Jack. I mean, that's why we're in university.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
I can appreciate the students have lots of problems, but how would they like to be a tradesman who is faced with $25 an hour, $25 a day and $5 an hour for night school to pursue their trade and qualifications?
What you're telling me is that...
in dollars and cents.
In other words, a tradesman pays almost the full economic shot for his training.
That's what they're shooting for, is total cost recovery.
Okay, the education program that we're fighting for is to be able to give the unemployed worker a chance to go to university or to go to a college while unemployed, so that they don't have to be on unemployment insurance, so they don't have to be on welfare. That's what we're fighting for, and that's what accessibility is all
And
about.
I'm not arguing against post-secondary education.
The average age at SFU is 26 years old. We have a lot of people trying to come back, trying to educate themselves, trying to retrain themselves. If we have so many people out of work, let's re-educate them. Let's give the people of British Columbia an opportunity.
Go ahead from Abbotsford.
I've got a daughter at UBC who's currently in her master's program. She's gone all the way through UBC on scholarships. I believe that if a student really badly wants to go, there's a way that they're going to go, and they're going to have to work for it. And when you're representing yourself out there as asking for no cuts and for, extra help, put the people out there that are really working for it. Because a lot of them are going to take the easy route. I can't take a job. I'll go to school and expect the taxpayers to pay for it.
What are you laughing at? I know, what do you like? There are
The
people.
thing is, there are people out there unemployed. I know that because most of us
And
are
I don't
unemployed.
blame them.
1 out of every 4 students was unemployed in the last summer. 1 out of 3 of those that did find a job worked as little as 1 day a week. And then we go back and we're told that our program is going to be a massive, huge loan program, so that we're going to be mortgaging our lives for what used to be.
Did somebody say that Bennett was planning to cut out the grants?
That's the rumor we've heard, Jack. They're talking about having an all-loan student aid program.
Of the 3,600, how much is grants non-repayable?
No, it's the federal government has loans, the provincial government has grants.
Theirs is all grant that they give to you. But of the 3,600, do you get 3,600 borrowed and then grant?
The first 2,300 is in loan.
Is in
and
loan.
then it's 50-50 grant loan until the loan is done, which is $3,200 maximum loan, and then if you're a single student, you could get $2,000.
One of your more telling points is the fact that they've tightened up the criteria for qualification for independence.
That's correct. The independence criteria has just largely affected students who might just go home for the summer, or take the case of the 30-year-old student who goes home and stays there and pays $300 a month, room and board. The provincial government considers that student dependent on the parents because he or she lived at home over the summer.
Mind you, the parents have got no money. This would qualify for the grants and loans, wouldn't it? If the parents are unemployed, they don't have to pay anything, do they?
Well, I have a friend whose father is unemployed, and she's going to be, when she graduates, she's going to owe $11,000 to the government and $11,000 to her parents. That her parents have still had to be assessed, and they have to contribute to her education.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack. I'd like to make 2 comments. One is that I think I have sympathy for the people there for student loans and so on. I think that they need to go back to the restraint program and recognize not only the students, but faculty and management at the university have to recognize that restraint is here to stay.
Okay.
And that they need to propose serious restraint measures in all areas. rather than just protesting on an individual group basis and expecting others to absorb restraint. I think on the second point is that the government also needs to take a common sense approach and study reasonable wages, the tenure system, the student loan system, the foreign student problem, and come up with a reasonable approach to restraint. Government has to study restraint in all areas of education and every other part of the province.
Okay, good point. Short answer.
The thing is there is no restraint in the provincial government. They've increased their spending by 12%. But they're cutting over the next 3 years, probably 30%.
You're using the old solidarity gag. There have been cuts. There will be cuts.
Not in total government spending.
No, it's a numbers game.
That's right. They're playing a numbers game.
It is cutting, and it will reduce their own cost.
They're
down
cutting
the road.
social services. They're cutting opportunities. They're cutting
the
the rights
White
of
the
British
Motor Vehicle
Columbia.
Inspection, the White House Consumer and Corporate Affairs Services to the public. They don't know what they're going to do about rent control.
Jack.
They're not the most efficient people in the world, but they are cutting.
Let's destroy one myth, Jack. Universities have been under restraint for the last 10 years. Whereas 10 years ago, we were almost 6%.
You gotta watch these administrators and these faculty and these tenured professors.
Per
It's
student
time
head.
they had their comeuppance in
Per
some
student
ways.
head, the funding from the provincial government from 1978-79, UVic has shown that the funding has gone down per head by 32%.
Yeah, I believe you're in a bad squeeze, and I wish you all the best of luck. Lisa Hebert, UBC, Brian Stevenson, UVic, and the noisy one, Russell, political scientist. You, of course, run for which party? Which party? Come
I'm
on.
not going to run at the moment. I'm also an economics major.
Oh, I see. Well, perhaps you'll join the Fraser Institute.
I doubt it.
Roger Nielsen is on the line for me after this break. Oh, poor Roger. On the telephone from Edmonton, I have the unhappy and unfortunate and probably bitter Roger Nielsen. When were you fired, Roger, as coach of the Canucks?
Last night, Jack, and I'm not bitter, and I didn't know you were on the sports beat.
Well, this is a big, big story, Harry. Roger, you know perfectly well that it's a Vancouver tradition that a loser gets chopped, regardless of his abilities or anything else.
Well, I suppose that's true, but that's the way it is in our business, and if your team doesn't live up to the expectations that management and ownership have, then they change usually the players first and then the coach.
Well, you're to blame, though. Will you admit the guilt for the lackluster performance of the Canucks since you came in 1981?
No, I don't think I will. I think when you chop the coaches, you say it's usually because of lack of communication with the players or because of questionable strategy or a system, and I don't think either was the problem here. I just felt we didn't play as well as what was expected, and they decided to hope that this will shake the team up.
Your overall record was 53 wins, 61 losses, and 23 ties. It ain't sparkling, is it?
No, it isn't, and I think we were all hoping to be over 500 this year, and we had all those close games, and we just couldn't quite do it. So, well, I think the future for the team is good. I think it's going to be a solid team. I'm just really disappointed I'm not going to be part of it.
Was it Harry who made the decision to chop you?
Well, I think ultimately, although it followed a phone call from Arthur Griffiths at around midnight last night, we were all sitting in my room here, so it was probably some pressure from the owners as well.
That's right, the guillotine descended from the top. Harry, have you got a no-cut contract? In other words, for how long will you continue to get paid your magnificent salary?
Well, I think I go for another year and a half, so it's not a financial problem, but what really concerns me is, what am I going to do next week?
You mean to pass the time?
That's right, and
can you take another...
That's what my main concern right now.
Always thinking about money, Harry. For instance, if somebody offered you a coach...
Harry.
Hey, God, save us all, Roger.
All right.
If you picked up a job tomorrow, somebody else gets fired tonight, will you collect 2 pays?
Yeah, I guess I would. That sounds all right.
Mind you, you must admit the team's been awful.
No, I won't say we've been awful. We've been in almost every game, and I think if we were awful, the fans wouldn't have come out. And we've had good crowds. They keep coming, and the games have been pretty good games. And I don't think we've been awful, Jack. How many games have you been to?
This year, I've been very uninterested, and I've been to a few. And I buy my tickets, you know, and I've been buying them since day one. And I wouldn't buy them for next year if they were going to continue to perform as they have done.
Well, I don't know if that's right. I think the team is a hard-working, hard-nosed team, and I like the team, and I like the players, and Stan is the best captain you could ever have. And We didn't quite do it, and they'll get over the hump soon.
Okay, what do you think of Harry? Has he treated you fairly? Has Harry Neal treated you fairly?
Very fairly, and my happiest years in hockey have been here with Harry and Ron Smith, who I'm glad they're keeping on because he's a good man. The players respect him.
When are you coming back to Vancouver, Harry?
Roger.
Roger. When are you coming back to Vancouver, Roger?
12 o'clock flight.
12 o'clock tonight?
No, the noon hour.
In other words, you want the cameras and all the ink-stained wretches at the airport at what time?
I don't want any of them.
No. You leave Edmonton at 12 o'clock.
Yes, that's right.
I'll make sure there's a happy reception committee and little Al Davidson will be there, and though he's denounced you, he'll say you've been unfairly treated. I say you had to get the chop. Roger.
Okay, Jack, you're the voice of Vancouver, so
and I know nothing.
But I'm not better.
No, it's got to come. There's no escape. It's like death in taxis. You lose, you get chopped. Thanks very much, Roger Nielsen.
See you, Jack.
Bye. I got to take a break. Next. What's your name again? Barbara Amiel, after the break. Barbara Amiel is editor of a tabloid in Toronto called the Toronto Sun, which consists largely of columns by some eccentric and some brilliant people. Luber J. Zink, for instance, writes in the Toronto Sun. But the brilliant columnist also happens to be the editor. That means she runs the editorial policy and the editorial pages of the newspapers. Is that right?
That's right.
This, of course, is Barbara Amiel. In a recent column, which she also writes in Maclean's magazine, she is supposed to have said that she would be rather dead than red. Now, Lester Pearson, our hero, said, or was accused of saying he'd rather be red than dead.
Lester Pearson is your hero, Jack. He's not my hero.
Who is your hero?
Who is my hero? My hero is...
Pick the world. Who is your hero?
I suppose Zakharov, Sharansky, people, Solzhenitsyn, people who might actually have put their lives on the line for ideas rather than sat comfortably in the UN or comfortably in the Canadian Houses of Parliament and taken the cream of life.
But surely Pierre Elliott Trudeau, with his magnificent peace initiative, which is getting great huzzas around the world, is going out in the best possible style, saving mankind and losing the government.
You've become a humorist late in life, Jack. It's encouraging to see it. Pierre Elliott Trudeau's peace initiative is a luxury, a wonderful luxury that has been given to him courtesy of Ronald Reagan. If, in fact, we did not have America, who was there giving us the protection, the nuclear umbrella that, alas, we need these days, Pierre Elliott Trudeau would not be able to nip around the capitals of the world having a wonderful time doing something absolutely meaningless. And interestingly enough, I was in London, England for a couple of weeks recently talking to the editors of all the major newspapers in London. They didn't have a clue about Pierre Elliott Trudeau's peace initiative. They knew nothing about it. When it was mentioned to them, thought it was absolutely a matter of no interest. And it is only here in Canada that we have talked ourselves into thinking that it has the slightest relevance to anything in the world at all.
Are you telling me that Pierre Elliott Trudeau's peace mission and the visit of the Chinese Communist Premier is a public relations gimmick for the Liberal Party?
The visit of the Premier is an abomination and an infamy to this country. I do not advocate, needless to say, nuking China. I do not advocate the cessation of trade. I do not advocate that we cut off contact with it. But when you ask the Premier of a country to address Parliament, you are conferring on him a very special honor, an honor to him and to the regime he represents. That regime has murdered more people than Hitler, has equaled Stalin in its murder. This very day has, by its own figures, about 20 million people in political prisons, and we are standing up in Parliament and giving this man a standing ovation. It's a shame on Canada.
But we have $1 billion trade balance in our favor with China. Surely it's more important to develop good relations. Who cared about the Jews in Belsen, Auschwitz, Dachau during the war? Nobody cared, did they?
I know. We marched past Herr Hitler at the Nuremberg Games. We saluted at the Olympics while the Jews were wearing their little yellow stars and under the Nuremberg laws. But Canada, this country that prides itself on being moral, that prides itself on being decent, stood in that House of Parliament and applauded a man who stands against everything that you and I believe. Why on earth? Is it too much to ask that while we conduct trade with these people, we at least conduct our affairs in such a way as to not dishonor the millions who have died in China?
Well, you wrote just the other day that we are a dull country full of bores and boredom, did you not? How can you possibly expect Canadians to rise in righteous indignation about anything, except perhaps, let me think of something about which they would rise in indignation.
The end of index pensions.
The end of index pensions. That would
You know
certainly do it.
something, Jack? Dullness is not in itself a bad thing. I happen to love this country, and that column, and I would be the last to accuse you of yellow journalism or taking anything out of context. It is not your style. But when I said that Canada was a dull country, I said that in fact dullness was not a bad thing in this world. Well, when badness and evil are the things that often make you a superpower, it's not so bad to be a country down the middle. We may not have built the Sistine Chapel, we may not have built the Villa Borghese, but we don't have the Gulag Archipelago, we don't have the Red Brigades. We are a people who have cut off the top areas of human achievement, but we've also cut off the hellholes, and so we kind of go along the middle. We're dull.
I want to get back to your statement that the very visit of this man, especially the appearance in the House of Commons.
Not the very visit. I'm not going to cut off contact. It's foolish to pretend that a country of what, almost 1 billion people now doesn't exist. It's foolish to stop trade. But when you address the House of Commons, how many premiers have? When was the last time an American president addressed the House of Commons? It's a very...
Oh, I remember well when he made the most gauche, incredible speech. Ronald Reagan talked about great Canadians like Mary Pickford. Do you not remember that? Incredible performance.
You don't like Mary Pickford?
Oh, and for an American president
Well,
to
bet
come
she's
and tell
better than Norman Bethune. That dreadful man that we think is a hero. Frankly, I'd take Mary Pickford over Norman Bethune and the millions he helped murder any day.
Yeah, he was only an alcoholic who was a Communist Party member who somehow or other has got the shrine of greatness and sainthood placed upon him.
If he had gone to the Third Reich, and if he had helped save the SS, if he'd figured out blood transfusions to help save Hitler's soldiers, would he be a great hero? It does have something to do with who you help that makes you a hero. The thing that I'm objecting to in that Prime Minister coming to the Canadian Parliament, and I commend Otto Jelinek, the only member of Parliament who didn't stand and applaud, is that it's okay to talk to them, but do we have to give them a single honor?
I didn't see that.
Yeah, Otto Jelinek was the only member of Parliament who did not give him a standing ovation. And when he was asked why, he replied very sensibly, to my mind, I have nothing against the fellow. Speaking of the Chinese premier, he seems very nice, but his is a country in which human rights simply does not exist, and I will not rise to my feet to applaud that.
Back to your pro-American statement, which I support in general, you know. They are the umbrella. They give us our freedom. They're a terrifying nation, however, in many other ways.
Oh, come on,
When you
Jack.
think of a 74-year-old president with dyed hair and a hearing aid who's very quick at one-liners and whom I would not risk with the button for more than 10 seconds.
Oh, and how would you compare him with our Prime Minister, with his often-on young wife, with his concern about his natty little dresses, with his carnation? Let's forget about style and let's look at content. The United States has done one singular favor to you that honestly should not be forgotten. In 1976, the Soviets pointed at you, Jack, at me, at the Americans, their medium-range nuclear bombers. Nobody did a thing. All those missiles were set up, aimed at Europe, aimed at us when they put in the ICBMs. Nobody said a word. Now, when we were in the greatest danger of all through the late 70s, finally we have an American president who's decided to actually aim some back. And you call that a great threat? Weren't you more frightened with the ones aimed at you? Why are you more frightened?
I was terrified with the ones aimed. I remember looking out at the living room window in the night of the Cuba crisis and thinking, if I get up in the morning, if I get up at all, it'll be one huge mushroom. But don't ever forget. Don't ever forget the reason that crisis came about. And it came about because the incredible tunnel vision of the Americans who refused to deal with Castro on a sane basis and buy him off.
Oh, come off it, Jack.
That would have been perfectly possible.
Remember, we gave him a ticker tape parade when he first came to power. He came with his chickens right up Fifth Avenue. His chickens, indeed, were given the best rooms in the hotels in New York. We gave every possibility for Castro to be our ally. We helped bring him to power. I think what you have to remember...
Your
What you have
memory
to-
is defective.
Oh no, Jack, I'm afraid that you're a victim of disinformation and misinformation, and should get to such a nice fellow as you is a tragedy.
I love Americans. I think I prefer Americans to all other people for casual, chatty conversations. But
Let me give you one example.
I was down in San Diego last week watching the start of the preparations at Christmas time for the Third World War.
Oh, come.
1.3 trillion.
Let me give you an example of why, and I wish it were not so, but why the balance of terror actually makes the world safer. And God, I wish it were not so. Ever since Reagan did what he did, take a look at how the policy of Nicaragua has changed. Once they were absolutely spouting all sorts of venom and rhetoric to us. Since the invasion of Grenada, the Nicaragua, who now sees an America that actually will stand firm for what it believes in, has toned down its rhetoric, has talked about reconciliation, has made overtures of peace. When you are strong, you can talk peace. When you are weak, all you can do is tug your forelock and be overrun.
Barbara Amiel, editor of the Toronto Sun, right-wing columnist in Maclean's. Want to deny that? You're on the air still.
I'm right of what is today the prevailing trend of thought. If you categorize me on litmus paper, Jack, I'm dead center.
After the break. Would you kindly tell me if you sleep sound at night because of the balance of terror? Barbara Amiel, can you honestly say to me that we are living in a securer age and time than, say, at the time of the Cuba crisis?
I can't say we're living at a secure age, but I can tell you I sleep a lot better these days than I did in the late 70s when we were in real danger. Now we have a fighting chance, just a fighting chance to maybe survive.
With cruise missiles in Europe?
How
cruise
else?
missiles, you can help anywhere. Cruise missiles.
Bows and
which are-
arrows, Jack, bows and arrows against the Soviet Union.
You're going to tell me that any weapon that's created must eventually be used?
If Japan had had the nuclear bomb, we probably wouldn't have dropped it. The fact that both sides have it and may have it in equal ranges may be the only goddamn thing that stops us from using it. If we don't have it, we will be occupied, if not physically, economically.
By the United States?
Wish it weren't so. I'd prefer to be occupied by the United States
so
than
would
Russia,
I.
wouldn't
No,
you?
of course we could. No argument about that at all. They're our friends. At least we can be nasty about them, can't we? Eh?
We always throw sand in the face of people who won't throw it back.
You give me this Grenada business. Perhaps I've got a relic of the old colonial in me somewhere or other, but that Grenada invasion was a piece of arrogant nonsense. They could have done it so much better with a handful of soldiers than pretending there was a massive Cuban army there, which there wasn't. They were very embarrassed. They dropped 6,000 troops, blow up a mental hospital. But if the British had done it in India, God save us all.
You sit here very comfortably condemning it. Try being a Grenadian. Try seeing your Prime Minister assassinated and ask the people if they're happy about it. And the answer is yes. Sit here comfortably, Jack. You don't have to live under totalitarianism.
I'm quite prepared to say that the Grenada people were glad to see Bishop and all the boys out of the way. But the gaucherie, if there is such a word, of the Americans in this case was incredibly pathetic.
Bunk. We may save Costa Rica, which is a democracy. We may save El Salvador. We may, in fact, contain... The El Salvador death squads are hideous, but at least they're not trying to overrun every other country. The problem with Nicaragua and Marxism that was in Grenada and Guyana is that it's trying to take over the rest of the Caribbean.
The massive invasion by comparison of Grenada.
Massive.
By comparison, don't be silly.
By comparison to a Boy Scout outing, possibly.
Well, the British used to do it with one squadron of Marines and a destroyer sitting offshore, go offshore and arrest them, and that was it.
Americans aren't practiced at this kind of thing. They need more people.
Yeah, they haven't got a Belfast either to practice
They
that.
haven't had Afghanistan to go into, North. They haven't had South Yemen to go into. They haven't had Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. This is their first time
You know as well
at
as I
saving
do that
something.
Afghanistan is a perfectly practical step for the Soviet Union because that is their sphere of influence and nobody ain't going to interfere.
Oh, and Central America isn't our sphere of influence?
Yes, it is.
And fortunately, we're not using yellow gas, and fortunately, we withdraw, unlike the Russians who go in and take over and never withdraw. Can you name one country? Aren't I awful haranguing you? It's awful.
Carry on, stop.
Can you name one country since World War II in which a communist government has withdrawn? Because I can name you half a dozen fascist governments which have gone to democracy. But can you name a single totalitarian communist country which has gone to democracy?
Help from our researchers. Help. No, they
well,
can't.
You can't.
Anyway, maybe you should run for Congress. Why don't you run for Parliament?
I don't run for Parliament because I think that I'd be put in the furthest back bench that the government of any could find.
Mind you, there are some Tories who would welcome you.
No.
None at all.
I've been taken out to lunch by the Tories. They lean forward to me. They say, your ideas are very interesting. You speak very well. And I say, do you know what my ideas are? And when they listen to me, they never call back.
Couple of things. I want your honest assessment. I know what you think of Trudeau. You think he's arrogant, erudite. What?
Evil.
He's an evil man.
Malignant. A man who is intent upon making this country a state.
Listen, here's a man who has a knowledge of how the system works. He made some magnificent appointments recently to the Senate.
Your sense of humor gets better each year.
Pick one and comment on it. I wouldn't like
Anne
to...
Cools.
Let
us talk about our first female black senator, who happens actually in person to be a lady of much charm, much intelligence, and pleasant. What possible qualification at age 39, and have you figured out what she's going to cost us at $61,000 a year till she's 75?
Couple of million.
Couple of million. What is it too much to ask that our upper chamber, the Senate, not be filled with women, or indeed men, whose only contribution to date is to have broken the law of this land, to have tried to silence ideas, and to have helped blow up part of Sir George Williams University.
She didn't help to blow it up.
I'm sorry, she was, I think what? She was president of the Young Communist League at the time. She was leader of the sit-in which led. She was not part of the people that ran around damaging it.
She was neither charged nor convicted with any conspiracy to damage
She was charged with obstructing justice, and she served 4 months in jail. She was not part, that we understand, of people who blew it up. She happened to be leading the people who blew it up. And blew it up is incorrect because it was damage caused. But Anne Cools is a person who made a wonderful speech when she lost the Liberal nomination. And in that speech, it was for the Rosedale riding, she accused the Liberal Party of manipulation, of buying out people with favors owed and favors due. Will Miss Cools, this paragon of virtue, integrity, and consistency, now see her appointment to the Senate at age 39 as perhaps one of those favors owed or favors due and resign her seat? I'm waiting to see her do it.
This, of course, is for a vote-getting purpose. What areas will she influence, if any? She ran twice as Liberal candidate.
I don't know what she's done. All I can see that this woman, who we are now going to subsidize to the tune of $2 million or $3 million, has done is argue very forcefully for her own interests and career. I would suggest that for the Senate, we need people who show some talent, some achievement. I'm quite happy if they're friends of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Patronage has always been with us. Every other prime minister would have done the same. But is it too much to ask that their friends be the most talented friends for the spot?
Now, I know a fella called Grafstein, Jerry Grafstein, advertising agent, lawyer, whatnot.
Well, advertising agent, barely. He's a lawyer. He's a QC. He's been active in corporate and communications law for 20 years. He's worked as John Turner's executive assistant. He's drafted administration for consumer and corporate affairs, transport. He was active in getting the Law Reform Commission off the grounds. Here is a man who has worked and worked bloody hard.
And deserves his political patronage.
And deserves it. He's earned it.
Gosh, don't you take a position that patronage in itself could be avoided in many ways?
No, I take a position by a man I don't like very much, but happen to say something sensible. John Hirsch was appointed head of CBC television drama. And when he was appointed, he gathered everyone together and he announced to them that he was now going to choose his friends for jobs. And he said, there's nothing wrong with that, provided my friends are the most talented in the business.
Were they?
Alas, no.
Is he still there?
He got out of there. He was eased out.
We'll take a couple of calls. What do you think of this woman, Amiel? Where are you?
Oh, and God bless Barbara Amiel.
Thank you. I could use it.
What do you think of Amiel and her views? That's you, come on.
Hello, am I on now?
Yes, you are.
Well, I think she's a modern version of Joe McCarthy. She reminds me very strongly of people like Spiro Agnew and Richard Nixon and And they're all nuts as far as I'm concerned. I spent several years down in the Caribbean, and she doesn't have a clue about what's going on down there. All she's doing is mouthing a lot of right-wing propaganda.
Joe McCarthy did not believe in due process, gave no attention to the court system, and I
But
take
Joe
this...
McCarthy was a liar and a cheat.
Are you suggesting that I'm a liar and a cheat?
Yes, I'm suggesting that you don't know what you're talking about.
Give
You're
me one
insane.
factual example.
Pardon?
Give me one example.
Well, the Caribbean, for instance, the United States role in the Caribbean. If you lived down in the Caribbean as a peasant, you would hate the United States.
Sir, when you start talking about peasants, I know where you're coming from.
Go ahead, please.
Yes. I'd just like to say that I find Barbara very intelligent, and I like what she's talking about, and I think she's a very nice woman.
You're going ahead. You're ahead now, 3-1. Go ahead from Nelson, please.
Yes, Miss O'Neill, you're tremendous. You destroyed Bethune's, the myth about Bethune. Will you do the same for Allende? I think what you have to say is right on, absolutely.
Thank you. One of the first things I want to do when I get back is write about the myth of Allende. Other people have done it much better, but I'll just kind of follow up behind it.
It was a former moderator of the United Church who opened my eyes about Bethune. MacLeod.
Really?
Was it MacLeod?
Now, if only his eyes could be opened on other issues, we might have a good United Church.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd never even heard of Barbara until your program this morning, but I find her to be a very well-informed and intelligent young woman, and I think everything she's saying is right on. I agree with her 100%, and I just think that Mr. Trudeau perhaps is maybe looking for a job with the UN after he gets out of the job that he's got right now. What do you think on that?
I think that it would be Canada's gain and the world's loss.
How do you like this? Setting the editorial policies for a highly successful newspaper in Toronto, The Sun, an a successful newspaper. It's a miracle newspaper.
It's a highly successful newspaper, and I live in constant fear that I will be its undoing. Setting editorial policy is really tricky because you have to wear a corporate hat, and even I have to moderate my views. So what I do is if I write an editorial that I don't agree with, I argue with myself in a column.
Do you take a party position? Does The Sun have a party position?
No. It is often true that we are more aligned with the Conservative Party, but these days, the way they're acting, we're having difficulty with that too.
In 20 seconds or less, the political scenario for Trudeau from here on in. When's the election?
Don't know, Jack.
Is he going to quit or is he going to stay?
I think he'll hang in there as long as he bloody well can.
You're joking. Mulroney, quickly, one word.
Got to find some guts and some spine.
Barbara Amiel, the magnificent Barbara Amiel of the Toronto Sun, Maclean's columnist. She also knows Fotheringham, but forget that after the break. Tomorrow we've got a spokesman for the PLO on. Is that tomorrow, Steve? Abdullah. And we've got a government guy who's going to respond to the problems of frequency of meat inspection. You might get tainted meat in the shelves, say some. Tomorrow, at what time? 9 a.m. precisely.